In recent weeks, the American press has been filled with increasingly alarming reports that the United States may once again face a sharp shortage of eggs. What only recently seemed like an exaggeration is now being taken seriously, even by the most cautious analysts. According to the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, several supplier countries, including Canada, have begun restricting egg exports to the U.S., citing technical standards, sanitary risks, and domestic needs. But insiders insist the real issue is not veterinary regulations, it is politics. Donald Trump's rhetoric has taken center stage once again, as he revives the tariff debate and puts pressure on agricultural partners. The situation is paradoxical. On one hand, U.S. farms had only just begun recovering from the recent avian flu crisis. The Department of Agriculture reported in July that flocks were growing and prices were easing, but sudden import restrictions are undermining this fragile rebound. Politico notes that negotiations with Canada stalled right after Trump's speeches, accusing America's neighbor of unfair trade and threatening new tariffs on steel and aluminum. Ottawa, insiders say, is now using eggs as a symbolic response. On Capitol Hill, congressional aides say the issue is being actively discussed in closed-door agriculture committee meetings. One aide to a senator from Iowa told Reuters, "We fear a repeat of the shortage when supermarket shelves were empty and prices quadrupled. Back then, partners from Mexico and Brazil bailed us out. This time, that help may not come." The reason is that many countries have redirected their exports to the Middle East and Asia, where demand is rising and prices are higher. What particularly worries experts are statements coming from South America. In Argentina and Brazil, authorities have openly declared they are ready to reconsider their export volumes to the U.S. if Washington continues to push for tariff revisions. The Financial Times points out that the farm lobby in these countries is closely tied to politicians who do not want to appear submissive to the American administration. Trump, for his part, has not changed his tone. At a rally in Texas, he declared, "America must provide for its own families. We will not depend on foreign eggs." His words drew loud applause, but in business circles they were interpreted as a signal of a new protectionist wave. Economists at the Peterson Institute warn that if the U.S. seriously attempts to cut off imports, domestic prices could soar to historic highs, since the industry is still vulnerable after avian flu and inflation shocks. The situation is further complicated by the fact that major retailers, Walmart, Kroger, and Costco, have already begun securing egg supplies through inflated contracts, fearing disruptions. This is pushing prices upward even before actual shortages materialize. CNBC, citing sources inside retail chains, reports that some companies are preparing to introduce purchase limits, no more than 1 or 2 dozen eggs per customer, just as happened earlier this year. The White House is trying not to dramatize the situation. The press secretary stated that the situation is under control and that talks are ongoing with key partners. But experts are skeptical. Trump's tone, his public threats, and ultimatum-style rhetoric seem to erode trust rather than build it. Analysts at the Brookings Institution warn bluntly that if this trend continues, the U.S. risks facing a scenario where an egg shortage can no longer be offset by foreign suppliers. Meanwhile, domestic farmers are in no rush to reassure Washington. Many went bankrupt over the past 2 years, while those still operating cannot quickly ramp up production because of high feed and energy costs. Ironically, it was Trump's own tariff policies on imported feed and fertilizer that made the situation worse. As one Nebraska farmer told the Associated Press, "We cannot feed America if we're being strangled by our own tariffs." The result is a troubling picture. External supplies are shrinking, domestic production is stalling, and the White House's rhetoric is only pushing partners toward tougher measures. And while a year ago the world genuinely helped America weather the crisis, today allies are increasingly turning toward China, India, and the Middle East, where they are paid more and face fewer political conditions. Analysts at The Economist draw a stark conclusion. If this trend continues, the U.S. could be left without eggs. And this time, no one will come to the rescue. This no longer sounds like a hypothesis, but like a real scenario already being discussed on Wall Street and in political circles. When experts recall the previous crisis, they almost always stress how different today's circumstances are. Back then, the shortage of eggs was caused primarily by massive outbreaks of avian flu that wiped out tens of millions of hens. The problem was domestic, and although the blow was heavy, the US managed to temporarily offset the shortfall through emergency imports. Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and even some European countries, despite logistical hurdles, opened their markets to help Washington stabilize prices. At the time, international supplies were seen as a lifeline, but today, the situation is different. According to the New York Times, many of the countries that once helped the US now refuse to repeat the same scenario. The reasons are clear. Global demand for food is rising, and political tensions make cooperation with Washington less attractive. Canada, which a year ago shipped tens of millions of eggs to the US, is now restricting exports, officially citing domestic needs. Yet Canadian analysts admit that the real factor is Trump's tariff pressure. Washington demands concessions, but is unwilling to give anything in return. Helping again under these circumstances would mean acting against our own interests, a source in Canada's Agriculture Ministry told CBC News. Mexico, traditionally one of America's closest partners, is also cautious. Officials there, in private conversations cited by El País, say, "Last year we saved the American market, but now our priority is our own citizens. And if US prices rise again, supplies will be redirected toward domestic consumption." Economists stress that the main risk of the current crisis is that it is artificially triggered by politics. When the cause was an epidemic, the solution was logistical and technical: find new suppliers. But when the crisis is fueled by tariffs and diplomatic conflicts, there is no solution until Washington changes its rhetoric, something few expect. Interestingly, debate is also intensifying within the United States itself. Democratic senators accuse Trump of leading the country into a dead end with his hardline approach. The Washington Post reports that some politicians are already preparing hearings on food security and tariff policy, which could serve as a public platform for strong attacks on Trump. But even if Congress intervenes, the process will take months, while the market reacts instantly. Against this backdrop of warnings, American families are already beginning to stock up. USA Today has published photos of empty shelves in some Midwest stores, where eggs are being snapped up faster than they can be restocked. And although authorities officially deny that a crisis has begun, the supermarket scenes look familiar. People remember what happened last year and fear a repeat. Panic feeds on itself, notes an economics professor at the University of Michigan. Thus, the difference between the past crisis and the current threat is clear. Then, America could count on outside help. Today, however, as analysts at the Economist Intelligence Unit put it, the situation is more dangerous. A second shortage could prove far more devastating, because this time the US may simply have no friends left willing to lend a hand.